Okay, so here we have a note on the quadratic equation. So the quadratic formula or the quadratic equation will give you the solutions to any quadratic equation that is in standard form. So standard form. And remember that standard form is A is the coefficient of the squared variable. Then B is the coefficient of the variable to the first power. And C is the coefficient, just the constant. So I have that. And now remember this is an equation. And anytime I have something that is an equation, that is going to be equal to 0. Or equal to something, and standard form says that it then has to be equal to 0. So standard form, remember that equals 0 is not optional. Must be equal to 0. And remember, I'm trying to make a big deal about this difference between equations and expressions, because this can really kind of go haywire for students sometimes. This gives solutions to equations, but it doesn't do anything for expressions. So this gives you x values that are the solutions to equations. So if I say factor this expression, that is not a time where you should be using this quadratic formula. So I'm going to go and do this example here. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is just make note of what my a, b, and c are. So first of all, this is in standard form. So my A is 2, my B is, and now remember, as this is the case with a lot of these polynomials, my B is going to include that negative. So my B is -5, and my C is -3. And I find that if you write out these if you write out what your A, B, and C are, you're a lot less likely to make sign mistakes. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to use this, admittedly, pretty complicated formula. So you need to be pretty careful. It's going to be the opposite of B. So that's the opposite of B. So it's going to be the opposite of B. My B is -5. Plus minus. So this means this is going to really give us two different answers, one involving a plus there and one involving a minus there, but we'll deal with that soon. Now, the b is squared, and remember when you square a number, you need to keep that in parentheses. So my b is -5 plus, or minus 4 times a times c. And now that whole thing has to be under that square root. So now my A is 2, and my C is -3. And that whole thing is then going to be divided by 2 times A, which in this case is 2. So this is... in some ways, this is nice. A lot of times students love it because they don't have to factor. However, be careful. There is a lot that can go wrong. This is a really big, complicated formula. There's a square root. There's a lot of negatives. There's subtraction. There's the squaring of something that might be negative. So definitely be careful with it. One thing that sometimes students make mistakes on is they put the x's into the formula. And so remember, A, B, and C, C are just the number parts, not the variable parts. So now I'm just going to go through and start simplifying this, and you need to be pretty careful. So the opposite of -5 is 5, plus or minus the square root of -5 squared, remember that's +25, minus 4 times 2 times -3. So that means this thing is going to be negative and it's being subtracted. So that's going to be plus, let's see, 6 times 4 is 24. And then on the bottom, I have 2 times 2, which is 4, of course. And now I can add these guys together. So I have 5 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 4. And then 49 is one of my nice numbers that's a perfect square. You can always use the radical button on your calculator to do this too, and that's something we'll talk about a little bit in class. I have 5 plus or minus the square root of 49 is 7 over 4. And now we're going to deal with what this plus minus symbol is all about. What that plus minus symbol is saying is that we're going to look at one case, and this should make sense because a lot of times that zero product principle gives us 2 solutions. We're going to look at what happens if that's plus. So we look at 5 plus 7 over 4. And then the other thing we're going to look at is what happens if that's minus. So we're going to look at 5 minus 7 over 4. And now I'm just going to simplify both of these. So 5 plus 7 is 12. So that's 12 over 4. And 12 over 4 simplifies all the way down to 3. And then over here I have 5 minus 7 is negative 2 over 4. And that simplifies down to negative 1/2. So then I have solutions. My solution set is negative 1/2, 3. And so those are 2 values that will satisfy this original equation that I started with. So these are the solutions to an equation. I've got that equal sign. You can also say, x equals negative 1/2 or x equals 3. Something like that is okay. That's supposed to be an equal sign. I believe my math lab wants things in this set notation, but I think they give you the set bracket, so be careful about that. All right, let's take a look at one more example. Okay, so here we have a problem that is, I look at this and it's quadratic. This is cool. However, it is not currently in standard form. So first of all, I need to make this in standard form. So get into standard form. So I am going to add 20x to both sides. And then I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. And so I end up with 3x squared plus 20x minus 7 is equal to 0. So now I'm going to do that same thing, and I'm going to get my a. So my a equals 3. My b equals 20. And my c equals negative 7. And now I'm going to take all that stuff, the opposite of b. Now my b is that negative 20, or my b is 20, so it's going to be negative 20. Plus or minus the square root of that b squared. And my b again is 20 minus 4, and that 4 is just always going to be there. That 4 is part of this formula. Times a times c, and then that whole thing gets divided by 2 times a. Okay, so again, I am going to simplify. The opposite of 20 is negative 20, plus or minus the square root of 20 squared is 400. And now because of that subtraction and this product is going to be negative, that's going to be plus. Let's see, 21 times 4 ends up being 84. And that whole thing is going to be divided by 6. So negative 20 plus or minus the square root of 484. I'm going to cross that out just because it looks kind of confusing. Now 484, I don't know the square root of 44 off the top of my head. So I can just look in my calculator and say radical. You should have a button that looks like this. That's the radical button. And then when you push that, that's going to help you find this square root. So I hit square root symbol, or radical symbol, 484, hit enter, and that gives me 22. So that means this thing is equivalent to negative 20 plus or minus 22 over 6. And then I'm going to have exactly the same thing I had previously. This breaks into two problems. Let's look at the plus option over here. I have negative 20 plus 22 over 6. And that gives me 2 over 6. And that simplifies to 1/3. And looking at the minus option, I have negative 20 minus 22 over 6. That gives me negative 42 over 6, and that is negative 7. So my solution set is 1/3 negative 7. Okay, and we'll take a look at those group problems in class.